South Carolina had the rest of the world glued to the TV as jaws dropped when a high-profile and prominent lawyer was linked to murder charges and 100 other financial crimes. This is how a revelation from the grave led to the fall of one of the most prominent families in South Carolina. Alec Murdaugh, 64 years old, was a fourth-generation partner at PED law firm, which was founded by his great-grandfather in 1910. His great-grandfather was so revered that his portrait was hung in the South Carolina Colleton County courtroom. However, this reverence will soon come apart at the seams as on 7th June 2021, an earth-shattering call would be made to 911 from Alec Murdaugh on his 1,700-acre property.
911, where's your emergency?
This is Alec Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to stand immediately. My wife and child have got bad.
Okay, you said 4147 Moselle Road in Arlington?
Sir?
You said 4147 Moselle Road in Arlington?
Yes, sir. 4147 Moselle Road.
Stay on the line with me, okay?
At the time police arrived, Alec Murdaugh was wearing a white shirt and brown shorts. He told the police that he wasn't home and he had just returned from a visit to see his elderly mother at a retirement home. When he came home, he found his wife and son were no more. Alec Murdaugh, who seemed distraught, was quick to proffer a motive for the tragic loss of his family. He told the police that his family had been subject of death threats following a boat accident in 2019 that led to the loss of one of the victims of the Murdaugh family, and therefore it began the intricate web of deceit and cover-ups. The web of deceit actually dates back to July 2015. On 8th July 2015, at approximately 4 a.m., a lifeless body was found dumped in the middle of Sandy Run Road near Crakerville, South Carolina. When the police arrived, they identified the man as Stephen Smith, a 19-year-old who went to the same school as Alec Murdaugh's oldest son, Buster Murdaugh. The family was notified of the untimely passing of their son. However, the cause of his death drew a veil over the unscrupulous criminal investigation into his passing. The family was initially notified that their son succumbed to a shooting. Later on, the narrative changed to a beating. However, on the autopsy report, the cause of death was officially casted as a vehicular hit and run by forensic pathologist at the Medical University of South Carolina, Aaron Presnell. The forensic pathologist drew the conclusion that it was a vehicular hit and run only because Smith's body was found on the road. The family of Stephen Smith was dissatisfied with the autopsy findings, and they were not the only ones, as the troopers and investigators also had a litany of doubts following Smith's autopsy. Upon further investigations into the autopsy report, it was revealed that Stephen Smith had suffered blunt force trauma to his head, which lent credence to the conclusion of a brutal or violent attack. The independent investigators also found that at the scene of the crime, they found no evidence of vehicular debris, that is, car parts or pieces. There were also no skid marks or injuries consistent with someone who had been struck by a vehicle. The investigators also cast doubt on the location of Smith's body, as it was inconsistent with the hit and run. During the investigations, the Murdaugh family was mentioned allegedly 40 times in the involvement of Stephen Smith's untimely demise. This prompted Sandy Smith, that is Stephen Smith's mother, to write a letter to the FBI to allay her doubts on the autopsy report. In the letter, Sandy Smith notified the FBI of the discrepancies as to her son's cause of death. The autopsy report stated that Stephen Smith succumbed to a hit and run. However, the authorities also determined that he had been brutally attacked, so much so that his entire face had to undergo facial reconstruction for his funeral. In a twist of events, the next morning following the gruesome call to the family again received a call from the solicitor Randolph Murdaugh, who is Buster Murdaugh's uncle. At the time of their call, they were in the police station for a positive identification of Stephen. The solicitor, Randolph, informed the family that he took interest in the case and sought to work pro bono as a liaison between the family and investigators. The family wrapped their heads around how Randolph Murdaugh had information despite the fact that the identification of Stephen Smith had not yet been confirmed. However, this would soon make sense from an eyewitness account. An eyewitness gave an account of the night of the untimely passing of Stephen Smith. He stated that he was traveling in Buster's old vehicle that night, that they met Stephen Smith, who was also driving, that Buster allegedly beat Stephen with a baseball bat to a pulp. In a letter to the FBI, Sandy Smith disputed the autopsy report. She stated there was no blood splatter at the crime scene, despite the brutal beating that Stephen received. Hence, it's apparent that Stephen was most likely transported to the crime scene. Stephen was also found 3 miles from his vehicle. His wallet was in the car, and there is evidence that suggests that he did not leave the car willingly. The family was pleading with the FBI for answers for the ultimate cover-up of their son's passing. On 2nd February 2018, tragedy would strike the Murdaugh home after the housekeeper, Mrs. Gloria Satterfield, tripped over the Murdaugh's family dog, after which she descended to the steps of the house. Mrs. Gloria Satterfield was admitted to hospital for treatment of multiple rib fractures, pulmonary contusion, and subdural hematoma. She contracted pneumonia and suffered a heart attack, leaving her in a coma. However, on 26 February 2018, at the age of 57, she succumbed. Herein lies the danger of a single-sided story. Following Gloria Satterfield's death, Alec Murdaugh, in what seemed as a noble act, sought to compensate the sons of Gloria Satterfield. Alex thereafter sued his insurance company for a $4.3 million settlement, thus the accident occurred in his home. However, once the insurance company settled with Alec Murdaugh for $4.3 million, that money was never dispersed nor received by the intended beneficiaries, which were the sons of Gloria Satterfield. Alec Murdaugh lied to them and told them that he had not received any settlement. Mallory Beach. The Murdaugh family would be embroiled in another accident that would claim a 19-year-old's life. On 23rd February 2019, Paul Murdaugh, that is Alec Murdaugh's last-born son, together with a bunch of his friends, which included Mallory Beach, went to a house party. Early in that day, surveillance cameras captured Paul Murdaugh purchasing alcohol at a local store using his older brother's Buster's ID. As he was underage, at around 7 p.m., the friends left by boat that belonged to the Murdaugh family to the house party. They left the party at around midnight. However, Paul, who was driving the boat, insisted they go to a bar downtown. At around 12:45 a.m., GPS records show that the boat docked at a bar, and Paul and his friend Connor went to the bar and had 2 shots. Both Connor and Paul were underage. Connor used a fake ID and Paul used his brother's Buster's ID. At around 1 a.m., Paul and Connor headed back to the boat. At around 1:15 a.m., the boat took off. Paul was driving the boat, and an argument ensued over his erratic behavior in the reckless driving. The erratic and reckless driving of the boat was picked up by the boat's Garmin GPS. The boat eventually crashed at 2:20 a.m. at Arches Creek Bridge. All were safe except for Mallory Beach, who was nowhere to be seen. Connor frantically dialed 911 and a search ensued for Mallory Beach. The rest of the friends were rushed to the hospital and treated for injuries. However, the medical staff drew Paul Murdaugh's blood, and his blood alcohol content was 3 times over the legal limit. As the search ensued for Mallory, it would come to a close 8 days later. On 3rd March 2019, Mallory's body was found. A month later, Mallory's family filed a wrongful death suit against the members of the Murdaugh family. On April 18, 2019, Paul was indicted and charged with 3 felony counts of boating under the influence, causing death, and causing grievous harm to other passengers. He pleaded not guilty and was out on bond. The Murdaugh family would be in the news for what prosecutors would call the perfect storm, as on 7th June 2021 at around 10 p.m., 911 dispatchers received a frantic call from the Alec Murdaugh home.
911, what's your emergency?
This is Alec Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to answer immediately. My wife and child got badly.
Okay, you said 4147 Moselle Road in Arlington?
Sir?
You said 4147 Moselle Road in Arlington?
Yes, sir. 4147 Moselle Road.
Stay on the line with me, okay?
When the police arrived, they found Maggie and Paul in a pool of their own blood at the dog kennels in the family home. Alec Murdaugh was wearing a white shirt and brown shorts. He told the authorities that he'd been gone and he'd been with his elderly mother who was suffering from dementia, only to return to such a tragic incident. The Murdaugh family put up a $100,000 reward for any leads as to the tragic incident that fell on the family. As investigations ensued as to the heinous crimes that were committed in the Murdaugh family home, trouble was brewing in Alec Murdaugh's law firm. Just 3 months after the death of his family, on 6 September 2021, Alec Murdaugh released a public statement stating that he had resigned from his family's law firm, the PMPED, stating that he'd made a lot of decisions that he truly regrets. The firm, however, released its own statement alleging that Alec Murdaugh had misappropriated funds in violation of the law firm's standards and policies. Alec Murdaugh blamed his reprehensible conduct on his battle with addiction and resigned to seek treatment at a rehabilitation center. Later in the same month, Alec Murdaugh would raise alarm and state that his life was in danger. This was after he was allegedly shot at a roadside and suffered a head wound. He claimed that he was changing his tire when an unidentified assailant shot him. Upon further investigations, the police discovered that it was all a ruse. Mr. Murdaugh confessed to hiring Edward Curtis Smith as a hitman. He had devised the murder-for-hire plot so that his son Buster could receive a $10 million life insurance settlement. Mr. Murdaugh was charged with conspiracy, insurance felony fraud, and filing a false report with the police. Over the next period of years and some months, Alec Murdaugh would be charged with the double murder of his wife and son and 100 other financial crimes that included money laundering, tax evasion, forgery, amongst others. On 23 January 2023, Alec Murdaugh was on trial for the double murder of his wife and son. The prosecutor's opening statements posited that Alec Murdaugh took his family's life to gain sympathy so the jury would be lenient in finding him guilty of his financial crimes. He contended that Murdaugh sought to escape accountability for his 100 charges of financial crimes. The defense, however, argued that Alec Murdaugh was in grief and hysterical based on the 911 tape. His lawyer argued that there was no direct evidence, no eyewitness, no cameras, no fingerprints, and no forensic evidence tying him to the crime. However, the prosecutors adduced irrefutable proof that Alec Murdaugh committed the crimes. They first disproved Alec Murdaugh's alibi. They proved that Alec Murdaugh was at home at the time of the murder of his wife and son. The prosecutors relied on a revelation from the grave, and that is what led to the downfall of Alec Murdaugh. The revelation came from a Snapchat video which exposed Alec Murdaugh. In the video, Alec Murdaugh is seen wearing a blue shirt and some khakis. However, this next video would cement the prosecution case. In another incriminating Snapchat video, where Paul Murdaugh and his mother Maggie Murdaugh were at the dog kennels minutes before their death, Alec Murdaugh's voice could be heard in the background disproving his earlier statement that he wasn't home at the time of the murder and that he was visiting his elderly mother at the home facility. At trial, during the examination of the caregiver at the home, the caregiver said that it was unusual for Alec Murdaugh to visit his mother in those hours and that Alec Murdaugh had attempted to bribe her to stay, that he had spent more than 20 minutes at the facility. Following this, the defense frantically tried to win over the jury by claiming that there was a double shooter. This theory alleges that at the night of the murders, there were two shooters who used a shotgun and a military-style rifle. The defense crime scene experts claimed that Alec Murdaugh, who is 6'4", was too tall to have committed the murders. However, prosecution witness Kenneth Kinsey rebutted all these claims. He stated that the methods and hypotheses that were used by the defense's crime experts could not be ascertained. He debunked the height of the shooter by stating that the shooter could have been 7'4". They could have crouched or pulled the trigger from their knees. As for the prosecutor, not only did he disprove the double shooter theory, he also proved that it was Alec Murdaugh who shot the wife and son.
Maggie was found. You heard that Maggie had no defensive wounds. You also heard Paul stippling from that first shot, a close range shot, with no indication that he detected a threat from the person who fired that weapon. And why? Because it was him. Same with Maggie, because Maggie sees what happens and she comes running over there, running for her baby.
At the culmination of Alec Murdaugh's trial, the jury found him guilty of double murder of his wife and son, and he was also convicted on 2 counts of possession of a weapon during a violent crime. During the sentencing, Judge Clifton sentenced Alec Murdaugh to a maximum of 2 consecutive life sentences. As for the victims of the Murdaugh family, on 21st March 2023, Stephen Smith's death was officially ruled as a homicide. His body was exhumed and a second autopsy was conducted. Investigations are still ongoing, however, no one has been indicted yet. However, Buster Murdaugh has repeated all allegations on his involvement into Stephen Smith's passing. As for Gloria Satterfield, her son Tony Satterfield testified during trial that Alex Murdaugh had misappropriated the $4.3 million in insurance settlement that was owed to the sons of Gloria Satterfield. Alex Murdaugh failed to disclose that he had received the insurance settlement on 2 counts. He didn't disclose that he had received $500,000 and later on received $3.8 million. The family of Gloria Satterfield now want her body exhumed to rule out foul play. This is because her death was not reported to the coroners, nor was an autopsy conducted. As for Mallory Beach, following Alex Murdaugh being convicted to 2 life sentences, her father had the following to say. He stated that justice has been served.